Hey guys, welcome to our next level of syntax. Today we're going to be exploring phrases. Um, but first we need to recap what we know now. Okay, we've learned quite a bit in this syntax chapter, this syntax section of our class. What do we know about syntax at this point? Well, there's two main things you know, okay, and we need to keep those in mind moving forward. The first is that in English, our clauses contain a subject and predicate, right? We are a subject predicate language. We also called this subject verb object or subject verb, okay? So that's the first thing to know. The second thing to recall is that all of our clauses and sentences are made up of these small individual units, and we called those parts of speech. Let me unfold these two items for you just a little bit more if I need to relog your memory. So the first thing that we know is that English is a subject predicate language. We also called this subject verb object because not every sentence has an object, right? We have the cow ate, which is subject verb, and we have the cow ate food, which is subject verb object. The bottom line is these are both still subject predicate sentences. What they have in common is they have a subject and they have a verb. In English, our clauses contain a subject and a verb. Remember, we're going to call them clauses and not sentences. And why, you ask? Well, here's why. Because this sentence actually has two equal clauses. This sentence has two clauses. The cat was meowing, that's the first clause, and the dog was barking. So inside this sentence, we actually have two clauses. Therefore, we have two subjects and two verbs, two subject predicates, right? So we need to be thinking about these as clauses rather than sentences when we're discussing subject predicate. And we're going to get to clauses in a couple lectures, so we're not going to focus on that word right now, but just be aware that when I'm saying we're subject predicate, I'm not saying all of our sentences have one subject and one predicate, because in an English sentence we can layer up our clauses and have multiple subjects and multiple predicates going on. So we've already explored this concept. Here's an example of some of the sentences we've been using recently. The subject of these sentences I've put in green for you, and the predicate or the verb and everything after it is put in that orange color for you. So our second thing that we have to recall, and we've learned at this point, is that all these clauses and sentences are made up of small individual units. And what are those units called? Well, they are called lexical categories. They're called parts of speech. And at this point, we've examined all of these categories, so you should have a basic understanding of all of them. And with those same sentences, here we can look at the different individual units inside each of these phrases, inside each of these clauses, right? So we have little bits. All of our sentences and clauses can be broken down into these tiny little units known as parts of speech. So what are we going to learn next? Well, we're going to learn about phrases. We have noun phrases, preposition phrases, so forth. There are 5 of them we're going to explore today. Phrases are meaningful units within the clause, okay? I'll show you an example in a second. This lecture right here is going to prepare for our work on clauses as we go more into that information. You need to be able to identify phrases, these phrase types, in order to be able to understand sentence level, how sentences contain clauses, okay? So in order for this presentation to work, you need to not only remember that we are a subject predicate language, you need to know the parts of speech. If you do not know what a conjunction is and what an adjective is at this point, this lecture might go over your head. I don't say that to overwhelm you, but go back and practice or contact me. I'm happy to help explain. So when I say that phrases are units within a clause, this is what I mean. So in the previous slides, I highlighted the subject and predicate, right? Those were green and orange. Then in the other slide, I showed you the parts of speech, right? I had circles around the different units and we labeled them adjective, adverb. Here, I'm highlighting the clauses. And you might not understand this yet, but this is what I'm about to explore with you. To make this easy, I'm trying to color code this lesson for you. When I'm talking about noun phrases, I'm going to always highlight it in this yellow hue, and verb phrases will be gray and the like. So I'm going to have this little icon on the side that's kind of like our cheat sheet or our color chart. That's NP for noun phrase, verb VP for verb phrase. That's going to be on the right-hand corner of every slide from here on out so you can remember what is what. But we're going to kick this off by talking about noun phrases because they're the simplest to understand. And here in our original example sentences, I've actually already highlighted the noun phrases for you. I want you to look closely at it because you're probably picking up, okay, well, the nouns in my sentence are obviously in the noun phrase, but why are these other words in there? And why are there 3 yellow bars on top of each other when we get cereal and toast with butter? Well, I'm going to explain those to you. So a noun phrase is built around the nouns or pronouns in our clauses, right? Basically, every complete sentence has one of these. Every clause has one of these. And how do I know that? Because we are a subject predicate language. And the subject is always a noun or a pronoun. So every sentence, every clause should have a subject, therefore will have a noun or pronoun, therefore does have a noun phrase. Okay, so we're going to work with these couple sentences right here to illustrate this. We have Sam jumped, and I've already labeled the parts of speech for you, noun and verb. We have Sam went home. And remember, you might have more than one noun in a sentence, right? You might have more than one pronoun or noun in a sentence. In that case, Sam and home are both nouns. And then we also have she visited him. In this sentence, we have 2 pronouns. Remember, pronouns and nouns can replace each other's positions in the sentence. So even though it's a pronoun, it's still going to be an indication that we have a noun phrase. So how would we identify noun phrase? If you can identify the nouns and pronouns in a clause or a full sentence, you are on your way to identifying the noun phrase. Here, using our color-coded chart, the yellow, I have highlighted the noun phrases for you in these simple sentences. So Sam is our noun, so that's our noun phrase. Sam went home. That sentence actually has 2 noun phrases in it, Sam and home. She visited him. So again, remember, pronouns and nouns can replace each other's positions in the sentence, so these are still considered noun phrases. But I want to highlight here again how a clause or a sentence can have more than one noun phrase. Well, what if we make our sentences a little more complex so they're not just 3 words, right? So instead of Sam jump, let's say stupid Sam from work jumped. Instead of Sam went home, let's say Sam went to his home. And instead of she visited him, let's say she visited him yesterday. So we're adding some other lexical units here. And this initially might scare you because the noun phrases are still here, but they took a little bit of a different shape given the additional words we have. So noun phrases contain everything describing the noun. So yes, it contains the noun or pronoun, but it contains everything describing it. You can have a noun phrase in a noun phrase. You can also have other phrases in a noun phrase, but we will totally get there in this lecture. But again, you can have a noun phrase in a noun phrase. So let me illustrate that by talking about our first sentence, our first noun phrase. Stupid Sam from work jumped. Okay, so a noun phrase is everything that describes the noun. So stupid Sam from work. Our main noun is Sam. So stupid Sam from work is our noun phrase. But inside that noun phrase, I have another noun. I have the noun work. So work is also a noun phrase. So yes, I have 2 noun phrases. I have a noun phrase and a noun phrase. Again, the secret is identify the nouns or the pronouns. She went to his home. So, Sam went to his home. Sam is our noun phrase. Went to his home. Home is the noun, as it was in the last slide, but his is an adjective, it looks like a pronoun, right? But it's an possessive adjective that's describing the noun. So we include that in our noun phrase. His describes home. Home is our noun. So his home is our noun phrase. Now let's jump to that last example there because it has a little bit of a difference to it. The sentence is, she visited him yesterday. Well, she is is a noun phrase, visit is the verb, him is a noun phrase, but visually your instinct might be, well, isn't yesterday, the word yesterday, included in that noun phrase? And the answer is no, because if we look at the parts of speech, and you're familiar with parts of speech, then you know the word yesterday is an adverb. And adverbs modify what type of words? They modify verbs, adjectives, or the whole sentence. So it cannot modify a noun. Therefore, a noun phrase has a noun in it or a pronoun in it and everything that describes it. Yesterday is not part of that noun phrase. Yesterday is actually modifying or describing the verb. Okay, so that's actually going to be attached to the verb phrase, which we'll get to there. We'll get to adjectives and verbs next. So in that last sentence, I set it up for you because it looks a little tricky, being that you want to include yesterday in the phrase. However, it is not because it's actually part of a different element of the sentence. With noun phrases, there's actually a pretty simple, well, it looks a little complicated, but there's a formula you can use to know what's in the noun phrase. So what makes a noun phrase? Well, it's any determiners, plus any adverbs that are used to describe the adjectives that are used to describe the noun or pronoun, plus maybe a prepositional phrase. You haven't learned prepositional phrases yet, that's coming up. All of that can make a noun phrase. So I've built a noun phrase for you as an example with all of those elements. The very handsome man from the restaurant, and I can say goes home. That's obviously not a sentence, that's a phrase, right? It's not even a clause because it doesn't have a predicate. So that's just to show you how long a noun phrase can actually be. And keep in mind, we can have multiple adjectives. Bottom line is this: a noun phrase is everything that's modifying or describing the noun, and that's these parts of speech right here. So here's our thing. We identify nouns and pronouns to find the noun phrases. In our example sentences, here are our nouns and pronouns, and then we know that it includes everything that describes it. So stupid Sam, our adjective stupid, describing Sam. I hope none of you were named Sam. I don't think I had a Sam in the class. That's part of that noun phrase, but we had to identify those nouns and pronouns to know where our noun phrase was. It's the same thing we did with our original examples. I've already highlighted for you or indicated for you where our nouns and our pronouns are in these questions, these sentences, and that helps me identify the noun phrases. Okay, so let's move on to verb phrases. Okay, so our verb phrase is basically the predicate. Okay, the predicate of a sentence is our verb phrase. We're going to break it down a little more for you in a second, but here I've highlighted for you what our verb phrases are in these sentences, and that's highlighted by the gray. And you'll notice how that gray line goes from the first verb all the way to the end of the clause. Okay, so verb phrases are the main verbal part of a clause and everything after it. So the whole predicate. Notice how we can have clauses within clauses. This is a little bit of a theme, right? That's how it works. So our first sentence, stupid Sam from work jumped. Jumped is the start of our predicate. It's the only thing there, so it happens to be the verb phrase. Sam went to his home. Well, went is the start of our predicate, so we highlight that whole thing gray. But inside of that, we also have a noun phrase, his home. That's how it works, okay? She visited him yesterday. Sam jumped. Sam went home. Sam visited, or she visited him. Those are all examples, again, of how our verb phrase might hold a noun phrase. And you're going to come to see that we can have prepositional phrases inside our verb phrases, things like that. But hopefully the color coding is working for you and you're following it. One last point I wanted to make is that you can also have more than one verb phrase in a sentence. So take this, for example, Mary thinks John ate the cheese. Okay, so Mary is our subject, thinks John ate the cheese is our predicate, right? So I've highlighted that whole predicate gray. But inside that predicate, I also have ate the cheese. Ate is a verb. So I have a verb phrase inside that predicate. Well, we're not going to get that complicated today in the rest of the lecture. I'm just letting you know it can happen. It's not very uncommon that we don't use multiple verbs inside our large sentences we utter because that's how we communicate. Let's move on to, or let's keep talking about these verb phrases. So again, to recap, to identify a noun phrase, you need to find the nouns and pronouns. To identify verb phrases, you need to identify the verbs. So I've color coded this. Our nouns are yellow. Our verbs are gray. So again, coming back to our original examples, I've turned gray everything that was a verb. I've already pre-identified that for you. And based on that information, we can identify our verb phrases. We're going to move on to prepositional phrases. I'm using green to identify those. So in here we have with butter, over the fence, with, and over are obviously what parts of speech? They are prepositions. The prepositional phrase is always has a preposition and a noun phrase. So the prepositional phrase is always a preposition plus a noun phrase. The preposition always comes at the beginning of the phrase, unlike the noun phrase. So let's jump to stupid Sam from work jumped, okay? So our noun phrase there was stupid Sam from work. Sam is a noun, right? But it's not the start of the noun phrase. We actually have an adjective before it. So we have stupid Sam from work. So in that case, noun phrases don't have to start with the noun as the first item. That's unlike prepositional phrases where the preposition is always first in the clause. So I've highlighted for you our prepositional phrases. We have from work and to his home. So both of those prepositional phrases start with the preposition at the beginning and then include the noun phrase after it. So from, preposition, work, noun phrase. To, preposition, his home, noun phrase. Okay, so just remember that. Prepositional phrases always start with the preposition and they're followed by a noun phrase. To identify nouns, we have to find nouns. To identify verb phrases, we have to find verbs. To identify prepositional phrases, you need to find the prepositions in the sentence. So in our example sentences, here are our prepositions: with butter, over the fence. And because we know that a prepositional phrase starts with the preposition and includes a noun phrase, we know that with butter is a prepositional phrase, and we know over the fence is a prepositional phrase. We're going to move to adjective phrases now, okay? Adjectives describe things about the nouns. Unlike the other phrases, these don't include other elements, other parts of speech, right? So a noun phrase can include adjectives, some adverbs, and determiners, right? The adjective phrase is simply just the adjective. And here we have two in these example sentences: my professor, and so my, and the crazy cow, crazy. Those are our two adjectives. So how did we get here? Adjectives are built around the adjectives. The adjective phrases are the adjectives, and that's it. So when we look at stupid Sam from work jumped, stupid is your adjective phrase. Sam went to his home, his is your adjective phrase. Keep in mind, we can layer up our adjectives, so we can say Sam went to his nice home, in which case his nice is your adjective phrase, right? We can layer up our adjectives. So at this point, you're catching on, right? To identify these things, we have to be able to identify parts of speech. And so again, in our original examples, my is an adjective, crazy is an adjective. So I know my phrases are my adjective phrase is my, and my adjective phrase is crazy. Hold with me. We're going to our last one. We have adverb phrases, okay? Here we have two adverbs in our example sentences. We have Alex was quickly eating cereal, so we have quickly, and then the cat might be killing the mouse today. Those are both adverbs. Adverbs are, as you can guess, built around the adverb. So, and she visited him yesterday. Yesterday is our adverb. I forgot to mention this, but the reason these other sentences are crossed out at the bottom throughout this lecture is because they didn't contain a part of speech I was addressing on that slide. So of those example sentences yesterday, this was the only one that had an adverb in it. So I wanted to point out something about adverb phrases that I don't want you to spend a lot of mental energy on, but we're probably going to come back to it when we talk about clauses. And that's adverb phrases can have other phrases in them. They can be much longer. So here's our sentence from the previous slide, and I've expanded on it to show you this. She visited him yesterday at home. So now, yesterday at home is our adverb phrase. And inside that phrase, we have the adverb yesterday, but we also have a prepositional phrase, at home. At is our preposition. So if you recall, what's always inside a prepositional phrase? A noun phrase. Okay, so home is our noun phrase. So again, we're going to come back to this most likely again in clauses, but I'm just showing you that even though my illustrations seem to indicate that adverb phrases are always one word, That might not be the case in the clause or the sentence you are working with. I'd hate to sound like a broken record here, but again, in order to find adverb phrases, you need to be able to identify adverbs. Okay, so I know in our original examples, quickly and today are our adverbs, so I know that these are our adverb phrases. Probably asking, why am I learning this? Okay, well, there's a reason, and we're building up to that. So you have a mental grammar. We also call this your linguistic competence, your competence in language, your language competence. Mental grammar is the generative grammar stored in your brain that allows a speaker like you to produce language that other speakers can understand. So, generative grammar is basically this theory that you, as a human, have an ability to communicate and it's innate. You have this working computer system in your head that has stored all these rules about grammar. You were born understanding some of these rules and you're able to use them to communicate and produce language that other people will understand. So we get a pretty good idea of how this works when we talk about phrases. And we can best see it when we're tree diagramming. So that's an exercise we're going to do in a second. Tree diagramming shows us how sentences are organized in our mental grammar. So it shows what rules you're innately applying when you're communicating in English. So as speakers of English, we know you're following these rules, and this tree diagramming is going to show that. We adhere to the subject predicate rule, okay? And we can create an infinite number of utterances by knowing this rule in our mental grammar. Okay, so we're going to practice this together. I know we're remote from each other, but I still think this might work. Using the example sentences below, we've been using this the whole lecture, these sentences. We're going to practice tree diagramming together. So I want you to pull out some paper to get ready to practice with me. If I'm going too fast, or you'd like to pause the lecture so you can try it first and then see what I produce to compare your notes, go ahead and do that. This is going to give you an illustration of also what your next exercise is. So let's jump into it.
Okay, let's start our tree diagram demonstrations. We're going to first work with the sentence, she jumped. So I'm going to write S for sentence, and we're going to recall some basic information that we know about English, which is that English is a subject predicate language. Okay? So I know that my subject is always going to be a noun phrase, and I know that my predicate is always going to be a verb phrase. This is how we start our tree diagram. So we're not going to, from here on out, write subject and predicate. We're going to have our sentence. We're going to put noun phrase and verb phrase because, again, in English, we are a subject predicate language. We are a noun phrase, verb phrase language. I'm working with the sentence, she jumped. And as we've gone through this demonstration, we've seen that our noun phrase or our subject always has to be a noun or a pronoun. And in that case, it is she. So from my noun phrase, I'm going to draw a line down and I'm going to write she. And then I'm going to identify that as a pronoun. Okay? Then for my verb phrase, I know that my verb phrase or my predicate in this sentence is the verb and everything after it. In this case, it's just jumped. So for my verb phrase, I'm going to write a line down and I'm going to write jumped. And I'm going to write that that is a verb. So here is our tree diagram for our very first sentence. Our sentence was she jumped, and you can see the rule that we're sticking to. We're sticking to our subject and predicate rule, and I have she jumped. Let's move on to our next one. From here on out, I've actually gone ahead and drawn the beginning parts of our trees. There's a reason I've put these two together, and that's actually because you're going to find that the diagramming's the same. Both of these sentence structures are identical. So we have our sentence, we have our noun phrase, verb phrase. Our noun phrase, and she visited him. Well, let's see here. That's our subject is she. So I'm going to draw a line down. I'm going to write she, and I'm going to write that that's a pronoun. Okay, excuse my handwriting. My verb phrase, remember the predicate is everything from the verb afterwards. So this one's going to look a little different than our last tree that we just did together. So our verb phrase has the verb visited, and I know that's a verb. But as we've discussed, and as I've shown earlier in this lecture, Inside our verb phrase, we're going to have other phrases. We can. Not in our last example with she jumped. We didn't have a phrase inside our verb phrase, inside the predicate, but we do in this case. And in this case, we have the word him, which is functioning as a pronoun. And pronouns are part of noun phrases. So off my verb phrase, I'm going to draw another line, and I'm going to write noun phrase. I happen to have the word him, and that is a pronoun. Okay? So again, inside our predicate, inside our verb phrase, we can have other phrases. And in this case, we have a noun phrase follow in our predicate, which is the noun phrase him, which is a pronoun. So this is almost identical to what we're going to have developed down here. We're dealing with the sentence, Sam went home. So our noun phrase is Sam. We have to start by identifying our noun, remember? So Sam is our noun. We don't have any adjectives or anything describing it. We'll look at some more complicated sentences later. So our noun phrase is Sam, and that happens to be a noun. Unlike in the first sentence where we're dealing with pronouns. We have our verb went. So we have our predicate went home. So our verb phrase is the verb, right? In this case, it's went. And that's a verb. And inside our predicate, remember this is all our predicate, we have the word home, which is a noun. So we have a noun phrase in our predicate, home, and that's a noun. Okay, awesome. Let's move on to some more complex sentences. Okay, so now let's jump into this sentence. And this one's going to probably throw some of you for a loop if you tried it ahead. Because again, we have to remember a couple things. Not only are we subject predicate, but we have to remember parts of speech and what those parts of speech accomplish. So again, I have my subject, she. So I'm going to write she, and that is a pronoun. I'm going to start abbreviating if you don't mind, because I could take this and make this last forever. Then I have my predicate, which is visited him yesterday. So visited is my verb. Perfect. And after that, I have a noun phrase, nothing new. Him, which is a pronoun. Okay, but then I've got this feature. And again, we know that the word yesterday is an adjective based on the lecture. And we know that noun phrases can only consist of words that describe or help modify that noun. And yesterday being an adjective based on the definition of an adjective cannot be part of that noun phrase because they can modify everything in a sentence but a noun. So the interesting thing here is that yesterday actually tells me about the visit, right? When the visit happened. It tells me about the time of the visit. So off the verb phrase, I actually have an adverb phrase. Okay? And that adverb phrase consists of this word, yesterday. And I know that that is an adverb. So that one might have been a little tricky for some of you. Let's keep going. Okay, stupid Sam from work jumped. Okay, so I've got stupid Sam from work is my subject and my predicate is jumped. This one might be a little tricky for some of you as well because it's new. So off my noun phrase, I know that I actually have an adjective phrase, right? It's the word stupid, and that's an adjective, okay? Then I have my noun phrase, Sam. So Sam is my noun, or that is not a noun phrase. We have my noun, Sam, and that's a noun. And then off of my noun phrase, I have something else, which I told you in the lecture. Not sure if you remembered it, but I have a prepositional phrase, right? From is a preposition. So I have a prepositional phrase consisting of from, which is my preposition. And what is always in a prepositional phrase? The prepositional phrase starts with a preposition and contains a noun phrase. Work. Work happens to be the only unit of the noun phrase, and that's my noun. Okay? So the first part, our subject of the sentence, was actually more complicated than the other ones we've been working with. The last part's much easier. Jumped is the entire predicate. It's my verb. Okay? So there you go. Let's keep going. I would encourage you to stop and pause at this time and try it yourself and see if you can keep up with it. So the crazy cow has jumped over the fence. The crazy cow is going to be our noun phrase. So we have the, which you can call a determiner or an article. We're going to call it a determiner. Okay. Okay. And then I actually have an adjective phrase, right? Crazy. And that's an adjective. And then I have the rest of my noun phrase. So I have cow, which happens to be a noun. All right, perfect. Verb phrase. This one's going to be a little interesting because you have to realize that we actually have two verbs in this sentence, and I hope you remember what they're called. So we have has, which is do you remember? Auxiliary verb. Okay. And then we have jumped, which is our verb. Okay, then after our verb phrase, what do we have? So here's our has jumped. Okay, I've covered those. Over the fence. Well, I hope you've guessed it. We have a prepositional phrase. And inside that prepositional phrase, I have over. It's our preposition. And what's always inside a prepositional phrase? Well, you guessed it, a noun phrase. We've got the article the, and we've got the noun fence. Okay. This is getting a little towards the edge. I imagine if we were in the classroom, I would be off the whiteboard already. Determiner. That is a determiner. Okay. So that one took a lot more of the piece of paper, didn't it? Let's keep going. I'm going a little out of order here now. I want to show you this one. Alex was quickly eating cereal with toast, cereal and toast with butter. Okay. So the reason I'm going to show you this one is so we've got our noun phrase, which is Alex, and that's a noun. And there's a reason I'm doing it way over here, because this is about to get complicated, because our entire predicate was quickly eating cereal and toast with butter. Okay, so we're going to go over here, and we have was, which is an auxiliary verb. Okay, quickly, which is an adverb phrase. We have quickly, which is an adverb, okay? And then we have eating, which is a verb. No problem, right? Okay, this is where it gets, you have to think. So off of our noun phrase, after our verb phrase, we have a noun phrase, right? We can identify cereal as a noun, no problem. So I have cereal, which is a noun. Awesome. But then I've got this conjunction, and we didn't spend time talking about conjunctions, which is why I have this in here. It's not a phrase, it's just part of this noun phrase. So off of this noun phrase, I've got and, which is a conjunction. Okay, still under the noun phrase, no problem. But after and, I have another noun phrase. So now I'm going to go another noun phrase. Toast, noun. Okay, I'm running out of room here, but see if you can follow me. So now I've got this noun phrase, but then what's within this noun phrase? A prepositional phrase. And no, your minds are blown. So try to stick with me over here. Just for the sake of this illustration, I'm going to draw a line all the way down here, okay? Because we needed some more room. So now I've got a prepositional phrase. Inside that prepositional phrase, I have my preposition with. Awesome. So that's my prep. And then what's always in a prepositional phrase? A noun phrase. So my noun phrase consists of the word butter, which is my noun. Ideally, you wouldn't have had to have a low-hanging branch on your tree, but we did, okay? It was a fun one, right? This next one, I'm going to tell you the sentence is, my professor, this next one, I'm going to tell you the sentence. The cat might be killing the mouse today. So the cat might be killing the mouse today. I want you to go ahead and pause this and go ahead and try that one yourself before you hit play. Because here in a second, the answer is going to show up on the screen. But I'd like you to go ahead and try the cat might be killing the mouse today on your own. Go ahead and hit pause and hit play when you're ready. Okay. Here's the answer to that one. How'd you do? I'm guessing the noun phrase went well if you've been hanging on to what we've been discussing. I'm guessing this one might have been a little complicated. Okay, so we've got our verb phrase, right? But we have might be killing. And we know might is part of the verb, but did you remember that it's a modal verb? Okay, so we have might be our auxiliary verb, killing. That's a whole verb phrase right there. Then we go over and have a noun phrase, the mouse, but then we have an adverb phrase, much like we saw earlier with the word yesterday, which actually connects to the noun. I hope you did well.
Besides the fact that understanding phrases is going to, and understanding parts of speech and how we're diagramming these sentences is going to help us understand clauses, this is also helping us to see the relationship between parts of speech and our mental grammar. So again, our mental grammar, that thing that's in your head, is the shared system that allows us to understand each other's ideas when we speak. Tree diagramming gives you a sneak peek of what this shared system looks like at the syntactic level. So this shows us what makes it so we can understand each other.